I am thankful to have connected with you on this podcast. I want to ask you a favor. Please do subscribe, and by doing that, you help us to bring on many wonderful guests that we can all learn from, grow, and make an impact. It's a great day to have Tom with us here to have a conversation, and we are excited. Tom, please tell us a bit about yourself.
First of all, let me say, Mama, thank you for having me. I was really looking forward to this conversation. And what can I tell you about myself? So originally, I was born and raised in Germany to German parents as a kid just in northwestern Germany at a town called Gütersloh, which is not far from the Dutch border, actually, about an hour and a half.
Oh, really?
And there's really nothing too spectacular there. Had a regular upbringing. Today, in April of next year, I turned 59, and at the age of 36, after starting a career in financial services, and I switched into IT sales, where the financial services became my customer. So I had a little bit of a journey, if you like, within my profession in Germany, and lived in different places there. But at the age of 36, I emigrated to the United States, and where my journey started in Boston, Massachusetts, and took me, I was going to say all over the place. I mean, from Massachusetts to Arizona to Oregon. Today we live in Texas, and as I said earlier, we're getting ready to moving back to Massachusetts.
That is quite a journey, an adventure to say. So, do you live with your family? If you say we are moving, what does it entail?
So my wife, that's my wife. Our son is grown and married. He actually lives in England, so we live
Okay.
all over the place. We have a rather international family, but I love it that way, and we enjoy visiting with friends in other countries as well, and really wholly embrace this type of living and this being together with people from all different cultures and nations, and it's fascinating.
Wow, that is so cool. We want to know more about that. But interestingly, what attracted me to you is that you have written a book. So, and the title of the book is Deputy While Immigrant. And I
Right.
found it very intriguing. And I thought, okay, I would love to hear more about this book and your immigrant story. So let's start with your immigrant story. Just take us away.
Right. So the obvious question, I guess, would be, well, how did you end up in the U.S., right? And why the U.S. and what all led up to that? So it's actually rather simple, I would claim, and that is just where love falls, right? So
Mm.
I was in the process of moving out of an apartment after a separation from my first wife, and I was moving elsewhere within Germany. And it just so happened that my now second wife
Mhm.
had just arrived in Germany and was looking for an apartment. And I was looking for a successor to step into my rental contract as a tenant. And well, to make a long story short, we got closer over the negotiations about certain items in in the apartment, and we ended up dating.
Don't make that
Uh,
story short. We want the details because it's very interesting. So if you can, please share.
okay, certainly, no problem. So what happened was she had just arrived, didn't really know what to do at the time. Their, apartments were still more advertised in the local newspaper, and she had a German secretary there. She worked for the Department of Defense on a U.S. Army base, and so they looked through the local paper, and my wife said, this is what I'm looking for, this kind of size. And then one of the apartments that they picked was the one where I lived.
Mhm.
And she described, I love that story, where both of them stood outside of the front door and saw my nameplate on the doorbell. And my wife said, how on God's earth do you pronounce that last name? So, because for an English speaker, the combination of Peine is rather difficult, right? And it's
Mhm.
pronounced Peine, which is the German way of pronouncing it. But so they come in and they look at this apartment, and they come back a second time because she's getting serious now and wants this apartment. And she learns that there's a couple of items that I would be interested in leaving behind for her to buy from me, including what in Germany is a very normal transaction, the kitchen. Because in Germany, if the successor doesn't take the kitchen, then typically the tenant that leaves can take it with them, and they
Do you
sometimes
mean
will do.
do you mean to say that you tear down the kitchen, so all the cabinets and everything, you bring it along with
Correct.
you, or you leave it
Correct.
for the successor and then they buy it?
Most people try not to do that because it's kind of a messy affair. But
Yeah.
if you, I mean, people will do that, right? They say, okay, I don't get the right price, and it's modular the way it's set up, so you can actually, once you remove the working surface, the kitchen
Okay.
counter, then
Mm-hmm.
you can take all the different pieces out and move it somewhere else.
Okay.
Just try
Okay.
and fit it as well as you can into a new kitchen. But it's still a very messy affair.
Mm-hmm.
So, and obviously, this was not something that was going to be cheap. So, as we agreed on the price, she looked at me across the table, looked at the German secretary, and then said, "Well, I'm not going to give a stranger that amount of money unless he takes me out to dinner."
Okay. Wonderful.
So yeah, and that's how that happened. So we went out to dinner and had a few nights later, and had an absolutely fantastic conversation. I mean, it went way beyond dinner, and we just kept talking and talking and talking. And it was really for both of us. It was just so interesting to learn about each other. And yeah, that's we ended up a year and a half later. We got married. And then when the time came, so we were talking about, I'm sorry, we were talking about the immigration part.
Mhm.
So at some point, uh, her work period in Germany came up for either renewal or to go back, and we had this discussion: what do we do? Do we stay here in Germany, or do we go and live in the U.S.? And there were a couple of things that we had to bear in mind. That was, she spoke very little German.
Mhm.
While I have had not only not any problem in speaking German, English. I spoke English in my job, and I was fairly fluent at the time. So that was probably the biggest aspect why we decided ultimately, look, it's just going to be a whole lot easier. And then my employer said, with your job and what you do, I worked in the software industry as an account manager.
Mhm.
They said, to us, it really doesn't matter if your desk is in Frankfurt or if your desk is in Boston or New York City. You can do your job from anywhere. And so it was just easier. That's how we ended up in Massachusetts ultimately.
Wow, that is quite a love story. But um, if you can share, so what brought your wife to Germany, and then you all both ended up back in America because she came to Germany also for a purpose.
True. So, and she has done these trips overseas before. As I said, she worked for the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense has bases and operations all over the world, to include, for example, South Korea. So previously, before coming to Germany, she had lived in California, and then saw a job offer internally that opened the opportunity for her to go to South Korea for a year and a half or 2 years. And she took up that piece and went to South Korea and lived there for a while, and was absolutely fascinated with the country, and said she loved it, loved it, loved it over there. Came back, lived in North Carolina for a while, but then she caught the bug, so to speak, and then she looked for other overseas assignments that she could put in for, and then Germany
Mm.
popped up. In her family, on her father's side, there are German roots, and she said, "Wow, wouldn't that be interesting to go over and live in Germany for a while?" And so she did. That's how she ended up coming to Germany. So her job was typically what moved us around to all these different places, even within the U.S. We later actually ended up living in England for a little while, and came back in 2018 to 2020, and lived in Germany again for 2 years, but ultimately then returned back here to the United States.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. I think that it's so cool you wrote a book because maybe all the journey and your love story, everything can fit in there, and it's going to be a wonderful book. I can't wait to read
That's the next book because this
it.
is
Oh,
the book is really just about one piece, right? The book is about that piece of me ending up in law enforcement. Um, because and maybe it's okay to if it's okay to talk about that real quick. So um, what brought me to writing that book was that, as it often goes, people will tell you, wow, what a story, you got to write a book about that.
mhm.
And of course you go, sure, yes, I will, one day, someday. And that's really funny, but why would I do that? Who would want to read that? But it kept going and kept going. And then people said, you have a unique perspective because you didn't grow up here,
Mhm.
but ending up in a profession such as law enforcement, that's special all by itself. And oh, by the way, you come from the corporate world.
Mhm.
What in the world, right?
What are
you
you
were,
doing
and by
here?
the way, you're 40 at the point that you came up with that idea. So my wife said that at the time that I came up with this idea, she looked at me and she said, "Look, what's going on here, right? Really, you're 40. Come on, just buy yourself a Harley or something like that."
Chill.
And no, but I wanted to be a cop, so I became a cop. And that is really, so that's it. That is the what the book is about. Number
Mhm.
one is, how did I get there? Why did I get there? And then what was my experience, and not so much, hey, look, all these extremely cool things that I did, and all the car chases that I was in. No, I really portrayed it how it was from day to day to day to day to day, and how you experience all this huge variety of stories that you run into
Mhm.
when people pick up the phone and call 911. And you just end up in the middle of that and
Mhm.
somehow need to maybe not fix it, but at least bring it back into a realm where it's manageable for people, right? Because that's usually people call 911 because a situation is out of control, and they want control back. And that's usually what we have tried to do then, to the best of our abilities.
I think that we will have to get all the Jews in the book, so we will get it as a community. But take us through when you arrived as an immigrant in the United States. So the first few weeks, trying to integrate and then
Mm-hmm.
get to know the culture. Your next step, did you go back to school? Seeking growth, how was it like?
Uh, I have to say that what was deceiving was the part I spoke English well and thought, I know this country and I know this place. And boy, was I wrong.
Mhm.
I think the US has a special problem there, and that is because their culture, or our culture here, is transported to countries and audiences all over the world through
Mhm.
movies and TV shows, and everybody sits in their chair at home and watches all of this. In Germany, especially, everything is dubbed, so you don't listen to it in the original language.
Mhm.
People speak German, which is twice as deceiving because now it seems even more familiar.
Mhm.
So you come here and you go, well, it looks a little different and cars are a little bigger, but otherwise I know how that goes. And everybody, has a gun. But uh, but it turns out it was very, very different. So that took me a while to learn to be cautious and be careful with how I would express myself, what I would say, just to be sensitive towards the American culture, right, and not be the elephant in the china shop. So that was one of the things. Then there were very practical things that I ran into. Things like I had no credit history because in the
Mhm.
US, everything is based on credit
Credit.
agencies, and I had what was called no credit, even though our income situation was just perfectly fine. But it cost us extra money to make up for that. So those were things that I didn't anticipate, didn't see before. I was very lucky otherwise because I worked for the same company. I worked with the same customer, even I was a global account manager at the time for Deutsche Bank. So I covered my customer in Frankfurt, in New York, in London, in Singapore. And so that was fairly or actually easy compared to what others have to go through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later, I ran into the issue with education, for example, that everybody said, well, you have this German education. What's your college degree? For me, for example, I don't have a college degree
Mm-hmm.
because I went through the German dual education system where for 3 years I learned banking and finance, so banking management. And they had trouble wrapping their head around that. So they said, oh, it was just a vocational school. I said, technically it's a vocational school. But then when I saw what was taught in college here on a number of things, I knew that I knew more already than what that was.
Mm-hmm.
So I just learned not so much to focus on that. I could have, but the profession I was in allowed me to not necessarily just drill in so much because I could say, look, I already have all these years of experience. I can bring that to the table, and that's just as applicable in the United States as it is back in Europe. So in that respect, I think I was very lucky. And then the final point that I can remember is I never felt, and this is odd to say, I never felt like an immigrant, and I have no good reason to tell you why that is or what the
Mm-hmm.
reason is for that. What I can tell you is the first time, excuse me, that I arrived in the United States was for a trip. My wife said, I want to take you, let's go. So you have an idea what the place looks like. And what I want to do is I want to take you to the place where it all started,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a lot of history and where the first immigrants, or where some of the first immigrants arrived in Massachusetts. And it was so odd because we land in Boston, Logan Airport. I get off the aircraft and I felt home. It was, and I didn't, it was a very, very strange experience, or not unsettling, but it was odd because why would I feel that way? I
Mm-hmm.
had no reason to feel that way. Yet that it was an overwhelming sensation. And wherever I went, I was there. I was home. Just, it didn't feel foreign to me at all. And I have, to this day, I can't give you a good explanation for why that was. I have no idea. It just was. So here I am.
Okay, so if an immigrant, a newcomer will ask you, how were you able to, just as you said, you cannot explain how it happened. Like you came and then you just felt at home. Was it because you were with your wife, or was it because you were very open-minded, or you just went with the flow? You cannot pinpoint it.
Not really. I mean, it's obviously when the language is not a big issue, that helps, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
huge step. So that was one of the big obstacles that all, if not most immigrants have to go through that I didn't have to deal with. Um, then sure, it may have been easier because my wife knew the culture. That may have been an aspect, but at that point when we visited, that wasn't there yet, right? Because I didn't go at that point. I didn't go to the U.S. to see if I would want to live there. We just wanted to go sightseeing,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually verbalized it at the time. And I said, "Wow, this is. I don't know how to tell you this, but I feel like I'm home." So we had a lot of conversations about that. And I mean, in the beginning, we had this situation at the Christmas party of my wife's commander where she's sitting with some of the other women and they look at her and they said, so where'd you get the Brit? They thought I was British because of my accent at the time.
Okay.
In school, we learned Oxford Queens. So that's the way I spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Over time, it changed. When we lived in Massachusetts, most people thought I was Canadian. So because apparently it started changing just from because I was surrounded by the
Mm-hmm.
language now, and I seemed to have a knack for that. So it kind of changed over time. And to today, I like when people can't really tell anymore. So some people have a very good ear and they can say, wait a minute, are you from Germany?
Because I was
So
about to ask you that, do you have people asking you, so that accent, where does it come from? Or are you able to blend in?
it happens. It happens, but it's usually people who like to look for that, who have a
Mm-hmm.
knack for oh, where are you from? Where are you from? And that's always a thing here anyway in the US. People are always very curious, oh, where are you from? Because that's pretty much, except for the native people, everybody here is an immigrant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has an immigration history and story. So I think that makes it a little easier because people are naturally curious as to where you're from.
Wonderful. So did you face any challenges when you arrived as an immigrant? And how were you able to navigate that if you had challenges?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier. So the deceit of I know this place, I know how things function over here. I think that caused, when I look at other things that I ran into, that was probably the most challenging because I always had to be a bit on my toes to be careful where I thought, okay, this is in this situation, I should react this way, or this is what's expected. Or I wanted to make, more sure than in other situations that the other side that I was speaking with or having a conversation with really understood what I was trying to say. So I learned, I would claim today, what's commonly referred to as active listening. So I would ask
Mm.
back, so what I hear you say is XYZ, and then they would either confirm or deny and say, no, that's actually what I meant to say was this and this and this. So that became very important. It probably helped me quite a bit later in my job today, where I work in the communications area as a spokesperson. So it really, or later in the investigations as a law enforcement officer, is helped me. So this is what I hear you say, and then people again would either confirm or say, no, what I was trying to say was this. Um, so I feel that was very helpful. But that was probably, I don't want to leave anything out, but I think that was the biggest obstacle because it was hard to spot. Right? It was not always um, clear that this is what was going on. I would just come home, be very frustrated, and tell my wife, and she'd say, "Okay, so how did that conversation go?" And I would tell her, and I get the eye roll, and then she would say, "So here's what they're trying to tell you." And I would go, "Oh, okay, I see." So I think that was the really the biggest obstacle for me. Otherwise, the reception was generally very open, very friendly. People didn't have. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm thinking back of, see, when I grew up in Germany, it was this phase where people would come from all over Europe to work in Germany because in Germany the economy was humming. In most of Southern Europe, not so much. So there was this big migration, and Germany began to invite people.
Mhm.
So in my elementary school, we had kids from Greece and kids from Italy, and I mean they were from all over Europe. And it it was. I sometimes felt bad for what they had to go through and what they experienced, especially looking back. I mean, I felt bad as a child. I remember that, and how I sometimes was you know chastised for, hey, why do you play with these kids? Well, because they're kids, and I like playing with them. I like them. So that was hard for me to understand at the time, but later as an adult looking back, I see my own situation and I have to think, oh my God, I'm just so lucky because nobody ever looked at me funny because of my accent
Mhm.
or how I dress or I don't know. That's something I fortunately did not have to deal with, and I really do consider myself very lucky in that regard.
I think that our experiences as immigrants vary, and that is why we need to tell our story so that we can all learn
Yes.
and then use it to our advantage. So what advice would you have for an immigrant who has moved from across the world to another country and they are starting afresh? What should they pay attention to? How do they see growth? How do they integrate so that they can assimilate and then contribute to society?
Right. Wow, that's such a loaded question because it very much depends. Obviously, from where I sit, I would say it depends on where you go to, right?
Mhm.
On the country that receives you. So you go and you bring everything that you have with you, and
Okay, let's
I
say
would
the person
say
is coming to America.
right. So a person that comes to America, so I think the important part is that you have to stay who you are, right?
Mhm.
It's very and to understand how valuable you are with everything that you bring to the table. And people here, from what I have experienced, for the most part, there are exceptions, but are very receptive to you bringing that to the table. And as an immigrant, I think those people who voluntarily make that decision to take that leap, they're typically more open-minded people, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't make that.
Mhm.
You're more willing to take a risk.
Mhm.
So use that ability and be aware of what's going on, and then go through that process of or embrace that process of assimilating, and integrating. Because I think it has to be a mixture of both, um, and that's often misunderstood in the receiving culture, right?
Mhm.
Because they always, not always, they often say, "Well, integration is so important." Yes, but do you mean integration, or do you mean that you want them to assimilate? Because that's something different, something
Mhm.
very different, actually. And because we all, there's people here in the U.S. that like to go out and eat, I don't know, Indian or Chinese or Korean or whatever it is. So isn't that part of immigration too, that it makes the receiving culture a lot more colorful and interesting?
Mhm.
It certainly does. So if if you if someone who comes in, you need to be very observant, is what I would really say. Is be that observant person, and be not only easy on the other people, but easy on yourself. Because when people are a little standoffish, or they may react to you in a certain way that may to you not always seem friendly, sometimes it may just be because they don't know how to react, and they just default back to, wait a minute, I don't want this, I don't know how to react to this person, and don't mean to be offensive, but to you it may feel offensive.
Mhm.
So I think you need to give people a little leeway. That's probably the most important part that I would say. And then be ready to embrace it. And if you have to go back to school, do that. Just, I mean, pick yourself up, and just just go for it and embrace it. It's challenging and it's taxing. It certainly is. Know that before.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, thank you for your insight. So we really want to know about your work as a law enforcement officer. What does it entail? You mentioned in the beginning that sometimes the 911 calls come in and then you get into the chaos.
Right.
Describe such a situation to us. How does, I know your work is very impactful, but it comes with a lot of challenges. Tell us
Yes.
about
Oh
your
my
work
God.
and what you do.
Where to start? So first of all, I'm not a law enforcement officer anymore. So I don't work in
Okay.
law enforcement today. I work for the local county as a spokesperson. Um, but in law enforcement, so I just started out as a regular deputy sheriff, which means we didn't patrol within the confines of a certain city, but outside of the cities. That was our area where we would police. And this was in Tucson, Arizona, and it was a very challenging environment because we had a lot of smuggling going on. So a lot of drug smuggling, a lot of human smuggling and human trafficking going on. So that was often tragic. But then you also have your run of the mill regular situations like domestic violence or robberies, or I don't know, violent crimes, sexual assaults to deal with, or murder. but or just your regular car crash. So it could be anything and everything, and you would never know, which was really something that fascinated me. When I would check on at the beginning of my shift, I had no idea what I would be running into over the course of the day. And I worked in patrol for about 4.5, almost 5 years. Was just a regular patrol deputy. Then I became a detective. I worked in fraud, financial crimes for a little while, then transitioned over into sex crimes and investigated crimes against children. And then in the end, the last few years, I was asked if I would be interested to be the spokesperson for the department. So I became what's known here as a public information officer. So I was the guy on radio, TV, talking to the newspaper folks and explaining the things that, my coworkers had to deal with during the day, or if there was a larger situation or a disaster, then I would have to explain to people, where they could find help, or just in general what's going on, so that people have a picture on what was transpiring in certain areas. And yeah, you asked for a situation. I mean, that's wow, so much to choose from. I mean, there's your regular situation when you have, let's say, a domestic violence incident, right? That's unfortunately a very common occurrence. So two people that live together or know each other well, that are family members, of one way or another, and they just end up in some sort of fight or confrontation. Doesn't always have to be physical necessarily. So Arizona law says that even if somebody feels threatened, or if you damage something in the house. So I had a Chinese lady once who had a lot of trouble understanding why she was being arrested. I mean, she had taken her husband's phone and thrown it across the room. She threatened him. She disturbed his peace, legally speaking, because they were yelling and the kids were crying. And she was very upset because she had found out that he had cheated on her. So she took the phone in frustration and threw it against the wall. The phone shattered. At that point, it's destruction of property. So I have criminal damage. And Arizona has a law where the discretion of a law enforcement officer goes out the window. So it's not, you can't say, okay, everybody now behave. We don't want to have to come back here. No, if you have a domestic violence situation and you can identify who started the whole situation, that person gets arrested as mandatory. You need to take that person away. The idea is to separate the two or three or however many it may be, and by doing so, make it safe for whoever the victim was. And have at least 24 hours until the other person is released from jail, and then has conditions maybe from a judge to not go near the other person or whatever it may be. And that's just a lesson learned from history, because too often these situations ended up where the police walked away and said, no, okay, everybody behave, don't go at it again. And somebody ends up dead or badly injured. Or so the lawmakers took the step to say, no discretion, it's going to be a mandatory arrest. So those were very often, and they can go sideways very quickly. So I had a situation where we get called, and the woman calls, and we respond, and we end up arresting her. I believe it was her boyfriend. And then she started attacking us physically, because she said, I wanted you to make it stop, but I didn't want you to take him away. Then he can't go to work, and then he doesn't bring any money home. So now what? These situations could turn in a split second and turn against us, even from the people that had called us. So that made it dangerous too. But yeah, this just the variety of these stories is endless.
So, Tom, what would you do if you knew you could not fail?
Wow. That's so hypothetical. I don't know, play the lottery. That's difficult. Maybe I would write another book. Right? I don't have a good answer to that. I wouldn't even know how to imagine that. So anything I would do would work out. That would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But then how would I ever learn? So here's the thing that I learned as a German. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna answer your question in a very roundabout way. Um, so German culture, having grown up in Germany, taught me to be, in a nutshell, be a good cog in the big machine, right?
Mm.
So don't be a squeaky wheel, be the
Mm-hmm.
wheel that just hums and functions properly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is your place. Your place is to be a good little wheel in the big machine.
Mm.
And so don't make any mistakes. Mistakes are bad. Errors are something that are frowned upon because you want to make sure that everything you've figured everything out beforehand, so that once you put something into I don't know, existence or into production in an enterprise of some sort, or even if you have a project, let's say in some kind of other fashion, you always want to make sure that it works as designed. That was, we come back to the challenges and setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that is so different here because kids, I'm thinking back of my son going to school here in the US, and making a mistake was encouraged. Just go ahead and try.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't try and if you don't fail, how are you ever going to learn? So that was a complete paradigm shift, and something like that is very difficult because you don't realize how deeply ingrained
Mm-hmm.
in thinking this is. I certainly didn't. And today, I can say that was so liberating to be done with that kind of thinking because I, for myself, decided and began to see that is incredibly limiting. I said it already, that it's very limiting in what you can do, what you can try, and it's so much from where I sit better to embrace your own failures and mistakes and see, okay, wow, that didn't work. So now what? What do I do to make this better? Um, it was so that's why I don't know if I couldn't fail. I believe is something that I now have trouble imagining because, as I said, I wouldn't know how I would learn, and I don't think failure is something inherently negative. I think it's part of the human existence.
That's deep. And do you think that so growing up in Germany, that culture of that you were taught that you if I got you correctly, that you had to succeed in everything that you did, is it the same today?
If I feel that way today,
I mean, is
or
this
is
the
it in
same
Germany here?
today? Is this the same today that kids are taught to be excellent in everything that they do, that they
I
shouldn't
don't
fail?
know. I don't know. I think to a degree it still is. And here's why I feel confident, fairly confident in saying this. We have hosted over the years a number of exchange students. So while the term is a little deceiving because there's no actual exchange going on, but they come here, they live with us for a year, they go to high school here.
Mhm.
So they're anywhere between 15 and 17 years old. And then have to live in this environment for a year,
Mhm.
learn the language. And that is one of the things that they keep coming back with, that they say school is so different here in the way that they teach, while they always say it's so much easier. So the European kids feel that the school over here is just a breeze. And they're always A students, even though they get top grades, even though they have to do everything in a foreign language.
Mhm.
Um, but they say that they enjoy the process of learning here a lot more than in their Italian or Dutch or German school. And a lot of it seems to be, when I listen to what they say and when they share their experiences, seems to come back to that learning is often packaged here into other activities. So if they actually try and apply what's being learned into, how do I need this in my everyday life? Why would that be of any interest? Oh, so if we if we talk about this kind of stuff in chemistry, then let's go outside and find out where that occurs in our daily lives. Or if if they have anything culturally, they visit the sites and then talk about that. So it's very involved. It seemed to me always very practical. So actually, the exchange students often get very upset and said, I don't know why a lot of the American kids are so bored in school and they don't participate, because my God, your guys' teachers are awesome. And it's so bad. I feel so bad for your teachers because these students just don't care. They don't know what they have. And it seems that they say in Germany, for example, or this, we heard the same from an Italian girl that stayed with us for a year. She said teachers are just, you come to school and you have 45 minutes to an hour to get what they're trying to teach you. And if you don't get it, that's your problem. Right. So then go home and then you obviously have to study more because you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's your fault. Whereas here, it's always when they go to the teacher afterwards and they say, wow, I really didn't quite comprehend what's expected or how I get from here to here, from A to B. And they said the teacher always has time. And then they sit down with us and explain it. So they're surprised by that.
Mm.
Where my reaction today is, well, yes, they're teachers. That's what they're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to a good degree that thinking is still out there, at least in the German realm. I saw it in the corporate as well, because as I was a global account manager, I had projects that would span different entities of the bank and touch Germany and touch the US, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And in the US, after, I don't know, 3 months, we would have a test project going and it was in the production environment. And they would figure out if it really saves them money or not, or if it would make the process better in quality or higher in efficiency, whatever they wanted to achieve. And the Germans were still deliberating of how to set up their project team. So, I mean, they're incredibly slow because of that. They may be they may have a very low propensity to making mistakes, but the others already dashed way ahead, which is probably why they're very good in engineering. And when you buy a German car, it sounds different when you thump the door shut,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they spend years on perfecting it.
Mm-hmm. It was quite insightful, and thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the impact that you are making in your community, in your city. Tell us about that.
So there's a number of things where I believe I have an impact on my community. One being inherent to my job, because I'm very visible with what I do for a living. As a public information officer, I'm on TV, I'm on the radio, I write press releases, I explain what certain decision makers within the local government here intended, or why they're doing things a certain way, or why they're not doing things a certain way. So I think that obviously is impactful. But there's other things that I do on my own and on my own time. And that is, for example, I volunteer here at the local Holocaust Museum, because, I mean, obviously because I'm from Germany, so that is something, that's where the Holocaust occurred. And it's very, very frustrating to me to see how many young people today are just unaware, not just of the atrocities, but which is terrible enough by itself. But that's only the result of the question, how was that possible? How was that possible that not just within one country, but throughout the areas that Germany occupied, with the power that the Nazis exuded, that this genocide could take place on such a massive and industrial scale? That's the shocking part. So, and that is to me the much more important part. Than in the past, I grew up with the numbers and the shocking pictures and how that was so awful. And I felt terribly guilty as a young German. I remember we went to England at one point as real exchange students, actually, where we went over there, and then the next year the kid that we stayed with came and lived with our family for a few weeks, and we went to a soccer game, and when we came back, our bus had been smeared with swastikas and Germans out and this, that, the other thing. That to me as a 13-year-old was a big deal. It scared me. And it stuck with me. So I'm just trying to bring something of that to the table when I do this in the museum. And interesting enough, so today I cover the programs for law enforcement officers because we're working here at the Holocaust Museum in San Antonio together with the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And we're only one of two places where we are using a new curriculum where we teach law enforcement officers about the aspect of law enforcement and policing during the Holocaust. And so how was that possible? How did they become complicit in this? Or were they? Question. So make the historical facts and how they got there, how was this possible, relevant to people today, where this happened almost, I mean, we're coming up on the 100-year mark here, but these are things. How do you keep this relevant? And I'm always relieved and very excited when it's working. So when they participate and when they become outraged, but then at the same time say, yeah, wow, if I would be in this city, what would I do? How would I react? Because if you narrow it down and not just talk about there were these mass atrocities, but when you bring it down to the personal level, the perspective, that change in perspective is what's needed to make it relevant for the individual. And I really believe that we're accomplishing that.
Excellent. And you are a true example of how our unique background and experiences as immigrants contribute to the new country. And you also show that it is possible to pursue our dreams as immigrants and succeed and contribute to our communities. And again, you beat that stereotypical idea that immigrants come and take away jobs. No, immigrants come and they add on to their communities. So thank you for what you do. You are very...
Oh, no. It's amazing. I love it. And I mean, here in San Antonio, for example, we live in a place that is so colorful because there's not just people from all over the world, but we're a majority Latino community. 63% of the people that live in this county are Latino. So they're not white American. And that alone, it feels different because the culture that they bring with them is different, but in a good way. It's when you go out and you celebrate with friends, or if you go out eat, or if you go and just I don't know, end up with your friends at their house. Things are ever so different in a very, what I feel, in a very enriching way. Because boy, what would life be boring if we wouldn't have
that? I know, right? So cool. So now it's time to invite our community to come and support you. Is there anything you are doing? Tell us about your book, where to get it, any project you are doing that you need us to come and support you with. Let us know.
Thank you so much for that opportunity. I really appreciate it. So if people are interested in the book, you can find it on Amazon, pretty much anywhere in the world. And check out the title, Deputy While Immigrant. You are most welcome to check out my website at tompeine.com. So that's TOMPEINE.com. And there's a little more story about the book, but also links to where you can purchase it. I love having conversations like this. So if there's anybody who feels that I can bring something to the table, I'm happy to participate. If anybody is looking for advice or help, I'm happy. The website provides an opportunity to reach out, so I'd be happy to do that as well. Because a lot of people who come here, especially to the U.S., I believe, because yes, we're a country of immigration, built on immigration, but a lot of people also come here and are very, well, I don't know. I think they have a very simple idea on that it would be all easy because it's the nation with endless possibilities, and well, it can be, but it's also very unforgiving. So if you fall and you don't know how to get yourself back up, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very, very difficult, and in that sense, it can be very unforgiving. But it's the spirit, right? It's the spirit of this nation. When the first settlers came here, there was nobody who would help them or pick them back up. They had to do it by themselves, and that still prevails to this day, which is where also people helping each other in a neighborhood, where that sense comes from, because you would always just jump in and help. So it was fascinating for me, for example, when my father-in-law passed away, and the neighborhood for the next, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days just continued to show up with food at the front door. People I had never seen, just so that you, as the family who's afflicted by this, doesn't have to worry about the most simplest thing, which is cooking for each other. And that was so touching to me, that people would think that way and just be there. And, it was not a big, where people wouldn't show up at the door and go, "Oh my God, this is so terrible. Here's some food." No. Everybody was, "Hey, here's some food." And they brought a little bit of cheer in. And that was so welcome because, we were in the dark spot, and it was wonderful to have some people come in and bring a little bit of light to that. So I think that's why I feel that's important. And if I can ever help anybody, then I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so much. So finally, please complete the sentence for us. Immigrants are
brave people and incredibly resilient. It's always difficult when we speak about a group, right? Because there's no the Americans, the Germans, the Dutch people. There's no such thing. There's just us. So with that said, immigrants do have a lot of things in common. And as I said earlier, I believe they have an innate openness. They are risk takers in a very good sense. And they're, to me, just incredibly brave. And I can only say, if anybody ever meets an immigrant, not just be kind to them and gentle, but embrace them, because it's going to be a fantastic experience for both of you to bring these people into your community and learn from them, because they do want to learn from you. So immigrants are also people who want to learn. They're open to that, which is why I think they're incredibly enriching to those countries and cultures that are willing to receive them.
Thank you so much for showing up and giving us your insights, your knowledge, your experiences, your immigrant story. We are so grateful you came, Tom.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure.